Earth's Sudden Tilt in 2345 BC by Malcolm Bowden, based upon the work of George Dodwell, B.A., F.R.A.S. Preliminary Notes. I am indebted to Barry Setterfield for the extensive information he passed to me in 1998 regarding George Dodwell's work on this subject. Based on this, I wrote pamphlet 236 for the creation science movement. Setterfield now has Dodwell's complete manuscript on his website. Google Setterfield Dodwell. I expected to find several YouTube videos on Dodwell's work, but was amazed to find not a single reference. I therefore hope this simple video will fill this serious omission. In this video, I'm using the standard heliocentric model and talk of the Earth tilting and speeding up its rotation due to a meteorite striking the Earth. This makes it easier for most viewers to understand what happened. I give the geocentrist view at the end. This narrative is mainly the text on the subject in my book, True Science Agrees with the Bible. In ancient times, astronomers were important people in their society, as they had to keep a record of time, changes of seasons, astronomical events, etc. One of the most important pieces of equipment they used was a gnomon, not unlike our sundial. This was simply a vertical pole, and the shadow of the top of the pole was carefully noted on the ground, which was accurately made flat, using water levels as a guide. The top of the pole may have had a hole in it to register the center of the spot of light accurately on the ground. With this simple equipment, they could tell the time of day very precisely and note the changes of the seasons by the changes of the shadow on the ground. In this diagram, I show the midday shadows at the longest and shortest days of the year. These are important, for they are the positions of the shadow when the sun has reached its highest and lowest levels and will change its movement in the opposite direction. The summer and winter solstice, i.e., the sun is stationary. From these angles, we can derive a number of other important measurements. If the angle WXS is divided into two equal angles, then these angles, WXL and SXL, are the tilt of the sun above and below the equator. What is important to what follows is that this line between the longest and shortest shadows and the pole gives the exact latitude where the gnomon is situated. Professor Dodwell. George Dodwell was the South Australian astronomer between 1909 to 1952 and had an international reputation. In 1934, he became interested in the obliquity of the ecliptic, the tilt of the Earth, and collected 66 records of the sun's movements, almost all from old Gnomon records over the past 4,000 years. He wanted to check the tilt of the Earth against these predicted values, and therefore calculated this angle from the ancient records with various modern corrections to obtain the true angle of the sun. When he plotted the results, he found that they diverged significantly from the curve predicted by Newcomb, or a later, more accurate one by Stockwell. The Gnomon records were on a distinct curve that gradually departed from the predicted tilt as you went back in time. This is Dodwell's original chart, and here a simplified version. How this fits in with the calculated tilt of the Earth is shown here. It is interesting that several other experts had looked at these discrepant measurements, but found them puzzling. Why could they not see what was so obvious to Dodwell? Dodwell examined the shape of the curve and found that it precisely fitted a curve which is the path taken by a rotating body that has been struck as it returns to a stable position. By mathematically projecting the curve back further, he found that it became vertical about the year 2345 BC. Clearly, the Earth had a severe impact, presumably from a meteorite, at that date. Only comparatively recently had it recovered its stability and was now at a stable angle of tilt of 23.4 degrees, but will very slowly now follow Stockwell's formula. What was the original angle of tilt? Almost without exception, the moons of other planets revolve around the equator of that planet, no matter what that angle is to the ecliptic. Even for Uranus, which is at almost 90 degrees to the ecliptic. Our moon is at an angle of 18 degrees to our equator. This suggests that the Earth's original angle of tilt was only about 5 degrees, that is 23 minus 18, to the ecliptic, enough to give a small seasonal variation each year. Regarding the stability of the moon's orbit, Psalm 89 verse 37 speaks of the moon being a faithful witness in the sky. Confirmations of the tilt. The latitude measurements. There is a very good check on the accuracy with which these measurements were made. From the length of the shadows, the latitude of the observation position could be accurately determined. In every case, this was precisely the known latitude of the city in which the observations were made. Thus, the records were accurate, which means that the tilt observations were also reliable. Manilius. There is confirmation of these changes by one observer who was still living when they were still large enough to be measured. This was Manilius, who lived in 14 AD and was a close observer of gnomons for 30 years. He noted these changes might be due to the discordant course of the sun itself and some change in the sky, or through some change in the universal earth, by which it has moved away from its centre, as I have detected myself, and I hear of also in other places. So his findings were confirmed by other observers. There could be no doubt of this movement, as he used the great 75-foot, that's 22.9 meters, high obelisk in Rome. This had a golden ball at the top, and he could measure its shadow to within 1/16 of an inch, but the shadow was up to half an inch different to what he expected. The Egyptian temple at Karnak. As worshippers of the sun, the Egyptians built long temples that were accurately aligned to the sunrise or the sunset on the longest day of the year. One of the longest and most magnificent was that of Amen-Ra at Karnak. This building is 1/3 of a mile long, down which the sun shone on only one day of the year. At a yearly midsummer ceremony of the manifestation of Ra, the king and priests would assemble in the dark sanctuary on the only day that the sun was at its most northerly point. Just as it was setting, and in line with the long axis, the doors would be flung open and the whole sanctuary would become a blaze of light, reflected from the gold on the walls and on the robes of those within. The sight must have been very impressive at this ceremony, when the sun once again blessed the Egyptian sun god king. Over the years, as the tilt reduced, the sun failed to reach its former most northerly point by an increasing amount. From this, if the angle of the alignment of the pylons is known, then from the tilt obtained from the theoretical curve, we can check when the temple was built by reading off from the graph the amount of known tilt and obtain the corresponding date. Realizing that the largest theoretical tilt was still more than the alignment angles of tilt measured at Karnak, Dodwell extended the curve from the other ancient records to meet these angles. This gave the two dates when the different sections of the temple were built, and these are the extrapolated values of 2045 and 1570 BC. There were many Egyptian temples that have passages that are aligned with the rising or setting sun, mainly at the summer solstice. There is a hieroglyph on an obelisk between the third and fourth pylon, erected by Queen Hatshepsut in the memory of her father, that says, "The sanctuary is a flood of shining splendor when the sun shines between the two pylons. It is seen an endless number of miles off, and the sun's disk shines between them as when it rises from the horizon of heaven." Sir Joseph Lockyer, The Dawn of Astronomy, page 106. Karnak is the largest and best preserved of many such temples aligned to the sun built by the Egyptians. Egyptian dating. It is interesting that these dates are much more recent than those used by Egyptologists, but they are closer to the reduced chronology for the Egyptian dynasties proposed by Velikovsky, Courville and Roll. They contend that the period should be shortened by some 700 years. When the shorter dating system is used, it ties in very well with the datings of the Bible. Indeed, I am certain that the Orthodox archaeologists deliberately adopted the Long Ages as their standard dating system to ensure that the dates of the Bible would always be disproved by their false dating system. Stonehenge. Astronomers have calculated from the alignment that it was built about 1900 BC. However, archaeologists and historians date this structure about 350 BC. By using the alignment and applying this to Dodwell's curve, the date agrees with that of the historians, 350 BC. The Bolivian Temple. Dodwell also investigated the ancient solar temple at Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. This was built for observations of the sunrise at both winter and summer solstice. On Newcomb's curve, they gave a date of 4000 BC. Archaeologists said it was 600 to 900 BC. Dodwell's curve gave a date of 700 BC, again in full agreement with the archaeologists. We show these dates on Dodwell's curve. Days in the year. In the pre-flood world, it looks as if there were 360 days in each year, 12 months of 30 days each. There is good confirmation of this in Genesis 7:11 and 8:3 and 4. We read that the flood began on the 17th day of the second month and abated after 150 days on the 17th day of the seventh month. 150 days over 5 months gives 30 days per month exactly. In addition, the circle is divided into 360 degrees of arc, which may have been derived from the sun's progress across the 12 signs of the zodiac, taking 360 days for a full circle. In addition, most, if not all, prophecies are based upon a 360-day year, 12 30-day months. For example, in Revelation 11:2-3, it refers to a period of 1,260 days and 42 months, which gives 30 days per month precisely. Some use a 360-day year in the 483 years prophecy of Daniel to correct this to 478 years to obtain agreement with the years between the restoration of Jerusalem, 444 BC, and the entry of Christ, 33 AD. The 360-day year was probably the calendar used before the flood, for there is no reference to changing the calendar reckoning until Moses gave the Israelites an observed calendar in Deuteronomy 16 verse 9. Archaeologists are puzzled by the when and why the Egyptians changed from 360 days per year to 365.24 days per year. The answer is surely obvious. For generations before the flood, society had used the 360 days per year calendar. After the impact, the Earth rotated faster to 365.24 days per year, and it took them a few years to realize this. So they changed their system. It is therefore possible that the impact of the asteroid increased the turning rate of the Earth such that there were now 365.24 days in a year instead of 360. Newton and other astronomers have discussed this subject, but there is surprisingly little written about when the change was first noted. A change in the year of this magnitude would have been quickly apparent, probably within a few years after the impact. We would suggest that only the impact of an asteroid could have effected such a drastic change. The near flypass of another body, such as Velikovsky proposed, could not bring this about. Additional factors that could increase the speed of rotation is the collapse of the water vapor canopy and the collapse of the crust if it was sitting on the water that provided the fountains of the deep. This movement of heavier material towards the center of the Earth would in both cases have increased the rate of rotation. What caused the tilt? It is generally thought that the impact was due to one of many meteorites or asteroids that are wandering around in space. Where did the meteorite land? There are various sites that have evidence of meteor impact. Yucatan on the north coast of South America, off Madagascar, etc. There is one large area where it could have struck and left evidence around the edges. This is the Pacific Ocean. This was the site proposed by Dodwell, and Satterfield agreed with him at the time when he was reviewing Dodwell's manuscript. When a meteorite of large size crashes into the Earth, it liquidizes the rocks at the point of impact and breaks into pieces that flatten out and penetrate the interior. When this happens, the hot magma pours out of the Earth's interior through the broken crust and covers the area of the impact. This outpouring levels off, solidifies, and a fairly flat area will then remain. We can see this in the craters of the Moon that have also filled with magma. If a map of the bed of the Pacific Ocean with the water removed is examined, it will be seen to be surprisingly flat for such a huge area, almost 1/2 of the total area of the Earth. Only small islands such as Hawaii appear above the surface. In addition, the Pacific is surrounded by what geologists call the Ring of Fire. This refers to the many volcanoes and earthquake areas that are around the Pacific. There are earthquakes in the Philippines and the huge explosion of Krakatoa in 1883, earthquakes in Japan, the Russian coast, Alaska, and North and South America. We do not know the plan of the land areas after creation and before the flood, and therefore we have no means of knowing whether it struck land or water. It is fairly certain that there was not as much surface water then as there is now, as huge additional quantities of hydrothermal water, supercritical water, were released from the interior by this impact that shattered the crust. This acidic, superheated, supercritical hydrothermal water dissolved the primordial strata and pulses over the sea floor. This rising, hot, acidic, dissolved material in the hydrothermal water reacts with the cooling, alkaline seawater and precipitates out the clays, rocks, gravels and sand that we see today. See Stanton's article. In addition, we read that the waters were gathered together into one place. Genesis 1 verse 9. If the impact was onto land and did trigger the flood, there is less likelihood of it generating vast waves that would have smashed the ark before it could float properly. In addition, there would, of course, be two places on the Earth where this sharp tilt would hardly be felt. These are the 2 points on either side of the point of impact, forming the axis of the tilting movement. It could be speculated that this might be where the ark was situated, so that its launching as a floating vessel could be quite gentle as the flood waters from the interior gradually poured into the area. Depending on the angle at which the meteorite hit the Earth, it could cause both A, the tilt of the Earth, and B, an increase in the rate of turning of the Earth that gave 365.24 days in a year instead of 360. Did this trigger Noah's flood? The impact may have caused the flood about 2345 BC. This would have caused the collapse of the water vapor canopy and the splitting of the crust to release the fountains of the deep. Some creationists date the flood earlier than 2345 BC. If they are correct, then the tilt may have been the later event when the earth was divided in the days of Peleg. Genesis 10 verse 25. A geocentric explanation. We have so far referred to the Earth tilting, rotating faster, and returning to a larger tilt than it had before the impact, just as in a heliocentric model. How is this explained from a geocentric viewpoint that maintains that the Earth is not rotating, is not going round the Sun, and is stationary in the universe that is rotating around it? It is a matter of integrity that I should face this problem, as it is unacceptable to have one view on one subject and a completely different view on another subject, and yet deliberately avoid making any attempt to reconcile them. Aware that I am unable to adequately prove what I am about to suggest, I will nevertheless continue to present what evidence I can, as I feel certain that future examinations will prove me correct. That my many critics will howl with joy as they fling themselves upon me does not worry me in the least. I refer to this at the end. Before dealing with this geocentric view directly, let me relate a solution in a parallel situation. On my website I have 2 articles that are good mathematical examinations of the geocentric universe by 1. Barbour and Bertotti, and 2. Popov. These show that all the features of the heliocentric universe are fully replicated in the geocentric universe. They explain the forces of inertia, the Earth's equatorial bulge, the advance of the perihelions of all the planets, not just Mercury's, for which Einstein fudged his figures that did not work for the other planets, and much else. Barbour specifically states that the proto-physics required when dealing with the whole universe are quite different from ordinary physics. Now these articles show that taking the universe as a whole, the mathematics demonstrates that the geocentric model is superior to the heliocentric model, as it explains more features in the universe. Without these articles, it would be difficult to claim that the geocentric model is a perfectly acceptable scientific model. When we come to the effect of the very dense ether upon our small central planet, I consider that the same will apply. As we have to change our concept of the universe to account for these geocentric forces, so also we need to change our concept of the control that the ether has upon our small Earth. Basically, the ether seems to be created to keep our planet safe and steady while it does not rotate, neither does it move around the sun. It seems to have a controlling influence on it that prevents any serious movement. So, could it be that the ether that adjusts to the new situation of an impact, so that the Earth remains almost stationary? As yet, there is no direct proof, mathematical or experimental, but consider the following. 1. The ether is most certainly a material that has some very unusual properties. Colossal density, no friction to moving objects, transmits light, has enormous energy within it, 0-point energy, etc. But modern cosmologists do not study it today because, to overcome the Michelson-Morley experiment results, which showed that we were not circling the sun at 30 kilometers per second, Einstein, in his relativity theorem, just abolished it. We note that in 1920, Einstein admitted that the ether existed and did have certain properties. 2. The Earth has a small Chandler's wobble of the Earth's axis around the pole star. This is perfectly acceptable to geocentrists. However, it has been shown that even this wobble can be explained by selecting a different axis for the rotation of the firmament. Thus, this wobble can be explained by the slight swirling of the ether moving the stars as a unit, and not the Earth actually wobbling at all. 3. The Earth is about halfway along one of the arms in our spiral Milky Way galaxy. All spiral galaxies have a point called the co-rotational circle, where the rotation velocity of the galaxy's disk coincides with the rotational velocity of the galaxy's spiral arms. This pattern is maintained by pressure waves, and astronomers have been worried that as a pressure wave passes the Earth, severe cosmic rays will be generated. New stars will be formed that may explode into supernovae that could eliminate all life on this planet. However, the Sun is very close to the co-rotational circle, and this means that the spiral arms will not sweep past the Earth, but will stay fixed in nearly the same place, namely the sheltered place that it now is. In fact, it is not quite on the co-rotational circle. Had it been, it would have resonated with the spiral arm pattern and been sent off, possibly visiting another spiral arms, creating huge problems for life here. 4. The Earth is situated in the habitable zone of our galaxy. The inner area is dangerous with high levels of radiation and high density of stars, whilst the outer zone is deficient in metallic elements. Looking at the last 4 points, do you get the feeling that our tiny Earth is in a special place, well sheltered from any serious disturbance? Some additional considerations. 5. A mathematical examination of the transmission of radio waves show that they need a signal to come from space before they can move outwards into space. In the same way, ocean waves cannot just start up on their own. They need an external stimulus. It seems that the ether may have some degree of control over the events on Earth. 6. It has been suggested that due to the strong effect that the ether has upon the Earth, that earthquakes are actually the result of stresses in the ether that build up stresses in the Earth until the Earth's crust moves, usually along a weak line such as a fault. 7. The Earth might tilt from an impact, but the equatorial bulge will possibly enable it to return to a stable tilt by the controlling influence of the Moon, pulling it back to a new stable tilt. 8. It is claimed that there is a communication field in the universe whose speed is 10 to the power of 107 centimeters per second, which is 10 to the power of 97 times faster than light. C equals 10 to the power of 10 centimeters per second. 9. The very simple two-slit experiment has produced results that to this day defy any common sense explanation. 1. Single photons gradually build up the banded strips that a full light produces. But how does each photon know which slit to go through to give these bands? 2. If a detector is placed at the slits to see which slit the photon goes through, the banding does not appear. 3. Two entangled atoms can be separated by a considerable distance, but if one of them is altered, the other instantaneously changes also. We see then that there is still much about this universe that scientists cannot explain. Regarding the increase in the days in a year, this could be explained by allowing the Earth to rotate slowly to give the extra revolutions in 1 year. However, if further examinations show that there is a very strong relationship between the ether and the Earth, as we have tried to show above, it is therefore possible that this increase could be explained by the ether adjusting its rotation to prevent movement of the Earth. This is a subject well worthy of examination by those geocentrists qualified to carry out such an investigation. I am well aware that my many critics will now proceed to leap upon my attempts to present a geocentric view of the Earth's tilt, and pour scorn and ridicule upon the whole concept. I am well prepared for this, and happy to let them thoroughly enjoy themselves while they can. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you for listening. Addendum. A reply to Dr. Danny Faulkner's May the 15th, 2013 article, An Analysis of the Dodwell Hypothesis. In my researching for this video, I came across Dr. Faulkner's article in which he examined Dodwell's work. It became very obvious that he was intent upon dismissing every one of the 66 Gnomon records that Dodwell had collected from around the world. He finally accepted just 4 of them as being reliable. I will leave the viewer to read his lengthy article to see if my view of his real intention is correct. I will make 2 comments. 1. In his conclusion, he says, Dodwell's hypothesis is highly dependent upon early measurements of the obliquity of the ecliptic that are not supported by Egyptologists. I have noted above that I am convinced that orthodox establishment archaeologists deliberately adopted a long ages dating system to ensure that it would never support any dates that would confirm the accuracy of the Bible. It seems he has swallowed their false dating system as being correct. I have consistently warned creationists from using evolutionist articles to criticize the work of fellow creationists, as they are all founded on false premises. Faulkner has ignored this warning. 2. It is just one of his conclusions that I consider to reveal his biased intention and actually destroys his claim to be objective in his criticisms. If the long axis was not for observing the solstice, what was it for? He notes that the axis is at right angles to the river and says, the axis was laid out so that one viewed the axis of symmetry as one approached the temple from a boat on the river. This makes sense, because most sites probably had boat landings at their entrances, and so this would have grand entrances for nearly everyone who visited the site. I would ask, is he seriously proposing that the Egyptians erected this huge building with a very narrow but straight passageway some 236 meters, 774 feet, long, with a small sealed room at the end, if it was only for making an impression on those arriving at the entrance from the river? They could not possibly have seen down this dark passage. All they would have seen would be a gap in a huge wall. Had they wanted to impress visitors, it would have been adequate to have built a very imposing entrance door only. I have quoted above Queen Hatshepsut's obelisk that records that the sanctuary is a flood of shining splendor when the sun shines between the 2 pylons. In addition, there are a number of Egyptian temples aligned with the sun. To have proposed such an unlikely explanation as the reason for building this magnificent and huge temple tells me that he was so intent upon destroying Dodwell's work that he was prepared to propose a most ridiculous reason for its construction. Indeed, any reason, provided it did not support the careful work of Dodwell. It is perfectly acceptable for one creationist to criticize the work of another, but it must be a fair and just criticism based on good evidence. Faulkner's criticism is not, because he totally ignores much evidence that supports Dodwell. As Dodwell was an Australian, could it be that Faulkner suffers from that dreadful malady known as the NIH syndrome? He ends his article saying, "Creationists are discouraged from embracing the Dodwell hypothesis." I regret to inform him that I will not be one of them.